Hello everyone, glad to be with you all again. We're just going to give a few minutes for the folks to join me. I'm glad to be with you again on a second night on a row. The purpose of this little time is to share with you all that we have to share with Maestro Pio during last night conversation with him. I have to say it's a big, huge challenge for me trying to share with all of you the wisdom, his wisdom, and of course in the way he expresses. As you may know, his wisdom also comes mainly from the Indigenous tradition. And there are some differences in the forms on how we express in the Western and modern languages compared to the way the ancient Indigenous express. So this adds more challenge when one has to translate. It's a very, very poetic way of speaking and expressing. And so this, of course, adds a big challenge. I've been working with Maestro Pio for more than 8 years. And through all that time, usually I am with him during his protocols, his 6 days protocols, translating to him live, direct translation. So as you might imagine, that's a big challenge. Again, as I said, is a very different way of expressing. And that's why during the process with Pio, staying 6 days translating everything, interviews and also the process during what we call the ceremonies, even though it's a big challenge, I have to say that I think that right now what I'm about to do, I feel that is way more difficult because of course it was a conversation, an hour conversation, and trying to express and to share with you all his wisdom and his words will be quite difficult. Nevertheless, I'm here to serve you guys, and in this occasion by letting you know what Pio offers. Actually, the purpose why I end up offering these 2 nights, last night with him in Spanish and this night, is just to let you know that Maestro Pio is now offering online personal consultations from his residency in Cusco, Peru. In my case, also, I'm very new to all these social networks and all these virtual communications. And you can imagine for him, of course, he comes from a different world. He belongs also to a different generation, so all these channels are very, very new to him. And that's the reason why I wanted to also give him a hand. As you know, the nature of Pio's work also has to do a lot with traveling all around the world. And because of that, right now he's not able to offer what he has to offer to the whole world. But at the same time, thanks to this condition, this situation that we're dealing with in the world, now we have the chance to have a personal consultation with him from our place, and regardless of the physical distance. This is the reason why I invited him. I just want to support him. He has a huge project of reforestation in the Peruvian region of the Amazon jungle. It's amazing the work that he's trying to do pretty much by himself. This is one of the reasons that I'm here to try to support him, to give him a hand. He often expressed this phrase that even if the world ends tomorrow, I'll make sure that I plant a tree today. I don't know if it's his or from any other wise man of the history of the human loving consciousness, always aware of the importance of taking care of our beautiful planet. But nevertheless, it's something that really I really received with a lot of power in my personal process, because I don't have the chance to be connected in that way to nature as I would love to, due to the nature of my work. And I think it's so important to move from the world of the spirituality into the world of action. And if there is one fact, one aspect of moving this process, this work that we do to develop consciousness and awareness, if there is one aspect that we should all cover, is the aspect of taking care and restoring also the divine nature of our world, of our home, of our earth. And so, since I'm not able to to accomplish this planting one tree per day, I make sure to donate to this project, Sachaqente, Pio's project, every month, hoping and knowing that for sure this little donation is being transformed into trees that are planting daily. And that's why I wanted to invite you all to be part of that. Spirituality cannot be something that is just about contemplation and that has as an activity that someone does in isolation. Spirituality has to be translated into the real world, into the world of action, and especially into how the role that we can play to restore our beautiful home, this earth. And then also to help Pio. For many years, he's been trying to develop this amazing, huge project by himself. And since I've been working with him, I've been trying to share with him also other ways, and especially to create a network that can donate to this project. Pio also has a big family. He has 8 children, so you can imagine also a big responsibility, and somehow working to be able to supply and to provide to both his family and his beautiful project of reforestation is too much for one soul. And that's the reason why I'm just doing my best, trying to give him a hand to be able to create a collective force that can help him to develop this project, so that he can put the effort of his own work and the resources that he gets from his work into, of course, the care of his family. This is just a little introduction to let you know why. So this is just the 2 things, just to let you know that you can now you can now schedule a personal consultation with Maestro Pio. And the second one is so that you can also make sure that you are moving your spiritual life and your spiritual process into the world of action and into the world of really restoring our planet. Since this is going to be quite difficult for me to expose to you all that he shared last night, I have invited my very good friend Chari, whom many of you know, just to also make it in a certain way of conversation. I have here my notes. I don't do this usual. I'm also just trying to connect to the source and transmitting directly from the source. But in this case, I'm going to need my notes just to kind of like make sure that I'm going through the content that Pio exposed last night. And that's why I invited Chari, so that I can also do this in a more dynamic way, in a way of conversation. Chari has also been part of the process with Pio for several years, so I think that will make it easier in terms of how we make more dynamic days, and also little things, technical things. So Chari can help me posting Pio's email where you can schedule your consultations with him, and she can also help me posting the link, PayPal link for your donations. So saying that, I'm gonna give the entrance to Chari, and let me see if I can find her around. Okay, this is questions. Now I want to see if I can put her here, or if Chari would like to meet me. Okay, let me see if Chari can reach out to me. Okay, there she is. Waiting for Chari. Hi, Chari.
Hello. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Chari, for accepting this invitation to give me a hand on this huge mission that I have right now.
You are welcome. It is huge.
Yeah, it is huge. So there she is already sharing the link, the email where you can request schedule your personal consultation with the Maestro Pio. And just to give also an introduction to you, if you can share with us how long have you been, how many years have you been working with Maestro Pio and myself?
Oh, well, with you, over a decade, I think. And then with Pio, I think probably 7 years, 7 years. I skipped a year in there. So something happened.
Very rare, very rare. Anyway, so just make sure that you jump in the conversation whenever you feel that that you can just make it more dynamic and bright, just as you are so bright. So first thing that we were sharing, actually, Chari was there also last night, but she said that she couldn't understand too much. She said actually that she was understanding árbol and soplo.
But we didn't have soplo.
We didn't have soplo. We had a lot of conversation going on around árbol, for sure, trees. So the first thing that we got into this conversation was actually the work that we've been doing, Pio and myself, for during the last 8 years or so, and this is about bridging the two traditions: the traditions of the Eastern spirituality, pretty much through the yoga, which is what as you guys know, is what I do, and the tradition of the indigenous tradition, the medicinal indigenous tradition, which is pretty much from the Andes, the Andinian indigenous tradition, and the protocol, the medicinal protocol, that pretty much came from the period of history of the Inca. In a very wrong perception, and of course coming from the anthropological view, we think as the Incas as an empire, and of course we think that all empires just like kind of like the Western empires, that they just expand themselves out of like steel and violence. But that was not actually the case, and this is of course what I'm sharing is actually from their own voice, not from the voice of the people who has been studying them, but from their own voice. And what they said, it was more a renaissance that was in the whole world. As we all know, we follow the history of consciousness. We all follow the development of consciousness, and we are also a product. Humanity is also a product of the history of consciousness. Before us was the animals, even before we were the animal, the plant kingdom, and so on. So we are the result of certain stage on the history of consciousness. And what are we perceiving? We're perceiving the frequency or the states where this consciousness move at. The levels and the states where these global and universal consciousness move at. So at some point, and then it's very interesting because we also saw in Europe and in the Americas kind of like this period of time where there was an awakening, the Renaissance, right? Is that how you say it also in English?
Yeah.
Renaissance. Thank you. Renaissance. See, that's why Chari's here with me. Renaissance. So there was also a Renaissance in the indigenous tradition, or they were also perceiving this renaissance, this awakening of the consciousness. And in that period is where the Incas started to develop a technological development, you can put it like that, but also in the fields of medicine, very important in the fields of medicine, and also in many fields, in the fields of development in general. And because of this development is that they were able to start to expand. It was not because they expand, actually, because the people around them, the other cultures and other, if you want to call them tribes, but the other ethnical groups around them start to, they saw that they were developing all this amazing development in many aspects of life, and that's why they start to kind of like to go there and to start receiving from them and to add to them. And this is actually one of the principles that Pio talked a lot about, this cosmovision, or this way of seeing the world, that is a very important principle in their tradition, that is the principle of inclusion. There is actually a term in Quechua, in the native language, that is Aini, that is the principles of reciprocity. So this is something very, very beautiful about the indigenous tradition, because it's not excluding. It's about adding up whatever is good, if it brings benefits, instead of like kind of like just going into a conceptual way of like, this is my way against that way. If what the foreigner vision is bringing to the local vision, if it works for the whatever works for also to improve the state of that local society or culture, they will include it. And that's why they also, that's actually the way they related to the whole colonialist and when the Europeans came into America. Instead of fighting about what they were providing or what they were trying to preach, they were actually, with no judgment, just and with lots of discernment, just trying to see what would be of their benefits, and they will include it as part of their culture. So it's a culture that is always growing up and always adding up, and this is so important nowadays when we see so much disassociation and segregation and polarization, right? So first thing that we start talking with Pio was about the bridging and what principles that these two traditions share. Also, when we talk about indigenous is not just from America. Indigenous is any culture, any group that has developed as in a local configuration, to say it like that. So whoever, if we talked about the ancient Europe, we're talking about indigenous, European indigenous, and so on, and same thing in Asia, in all around the world. So there is these points, these principles where you can find in all the ancient traditions. Here I would like to call for the attention that when we talk about historical facts, we talk about negative facts, right? When you think like, just try to remember something that is historical, right? First thing that we go actually is kind of like to war events, right? Or events that pretty much where people were struggling and there was kind of like conflict, right? And it's kind of like, it's crazy, but most of the things that we relate or that is in our historical memory is things that are negative. Instead, when we think about ancient things, we end up thinking about very positive things, right? Just think about a world war, or think about the Egyptians, just to call for something that is not related even to what we're talking here. But you see, when we talk about the ancient world, we often find principles, and we often find principles that are more positive and that we don't relate with negative events. So, of course, as we go into the ancient world, we see principles that are very similar. Why? Because the ancient world talks about the origin and the essence of humanity. And then before we end up creating and building these structures like civilization or ways of living or ways of creating our development, we were just trying to understand our nature. And if you see in the Eastern spirituality, this is all about pretty much this could be even the definition of Eastern tradition. Is all about realizing the self. And as we do it in the yoga, as we say in the yoga, is about self-realization. Meanwhile, in the America's ancient traditions, is all about the process, again, of integration. Finding oneself, and as you find oneself here on earth, because there is no this separation, there's no dissociation between spirituality and material world. It's just about both of those worlds are part of one unit. So funny enough, when the yoga came into the West has a way of conceptualizing things and creating knowledge out of things. And because of that, the Eastern spirituality is not that it's conceptual, it's not that it's mental, but it has this kind of this differentiation between spirituality and the material world. But when it came into the West, then because it went through the conceptual and rationality, then kind of like we end up developing another kind of a spirituality like the one that we had here based on religion, like Christianity, that is pretty much ideological and very, very much conceptual. So all of this, we were talking with Pio, we see, for example, he's a very devoted Christian. He's an Indian Christian because, of course, it's more about leading these principles that is not, they are not Christian, but they are just because of the life example that Jesus brought. So then you see kind of like it's interesting to see how naturally, because of these principles of inclusion, they end up creating a very different, you can say even religious practice that in Europe. And somehow is more practical, more down to earth, because it's more free from idealization. It's more just in a free flow, more organic, and then also giving more chance to anyone to develop their own spirituality, as instead of trying to follow specific the laws of the religion that religion is preaching, right? So it's kind of like following the example of Jesus, as instead of like studying and following the regulations of the people who wrote about Jesus, that created a structure about what Christianity should be. So what Christianity should be? Well, we know that there are religious, there are very specific structures that tells what is Christianity and what is not Christianity. But on the other hand, you just have the living example of the one who was the source of this Christianity, which was Jesus, who was pretty much not about laws, but about living these principles that he was not too much preaching, but just exposing through his life example. So when he goes and he talks about the Eastern spirituality, what he mentioned is that even though, well, we have to also consider that as it came into the West, it was kind of like brought into a structure of conceptualization. And we see it how different it is, what we think that Buddhism is, what yoga is, from our academic studies, from our even from our higher education studies of master degrees of compared religions and so on. And when you go and you talk to somebody in Nepal or somebody in all these regions where it's kind of like Buddhism is a way of living and not too much about how smart and how much knowledge you have about Buddhism. And the same thing about yoga. It's in this case is based on the practice, and it is not necessarily based on the knowledge and how much you have in the study and how many hours you have of yoga study, as we now see in this world, right? So, but then he was pointing kind of like, so the principles are very, very clear. It's pretty much about unifying, united. It's about unifying, integrating. That's what yoga is, right? It comes from the word yug. Pio was also a devoted yoga practitioner when he was very, very young, 13 years old or so. So also it's wonderful because he has kind of like also that experience. When he presents to us the spirituality of the indigenous spirituality, he can relate on these terms that, of course, are sometimes easier for us to understand something that could be too foreigner to us or too unknown to us. But he put something, he mentioned something that was very important, and is how like this Eastern spirituality does not consider nature as part of the spiritual process. And this is something, of course, that is, he also mentioned, that is something that is also shared with Christianity as a religion. It's something that in Christianity, whatever is material and is physical is mundane, is actually kind of like the opposite and contrary to, in contradiction actually, with the spiritual search. And even though in the Eastern spirituality is not like that, that is just kind of like opposite, but it's not taken into consideration, or at least with the importance, the primary importance that it is in the spiritual world of the ancient Americas. There could be no spirituality in the indigenous world without actually integrating, and that's what the spirituality is all about. Integrating. We live in a body, but mainly we are in a spirit. So if we try to transcend into a spiritual search, how we can actually get to that if we don't use what we have, that is our existence right here, and that existence is possible thanks to this body, and this body is actually part of the creation, and so it's part of the earth, and that's of course a major difference of the perspective of the indigenous, both for the Western tradition and both for the Eastern spirituality. The body is part of the earth and not the opposite. So something about this inclusion principle, that is so powerful in the indigenous tradition, is that nature is kind of like the path to go towards the spirit. If you want to search for spirituality, then you have to start by what you have. He was mentioning a beautiful example on the art craft and the artists who create that art craft. We go to a museum, we see the art craft, and then at the end of the exposition, we give a hand and we say congratulations to the artist, right? But kind of like in an example that he put there, kind of like to say, like, that's kind of like our relationship with the spirituality. Is like we acknowledge, but not all the time. You know, that's already something that we should aim for, to acknowledge the beauty and how the whole divinity is there in the creation, right? And embedded in the creation, expressed in the creation. That's already something, because often in many spiritual perspective, that's not even the case. It's just the world and nature is just mundane, don't even put attention to that. So even just to acknowledge this divine nature of the creation is already something. But in the indigenous world, they go one step deeper into this integration through this inclusivity. And it is that there's no actually dissociation. So everything is, you cannot separate the creator and the creation. So the way they develop the spirituality, it is actually through creation. This kind of like was a very, very kind of like the first part that we developed with him. And again, everything is based in this principle that is Aini. That is that Aini, as in many of these ancient terms, not just in the indigenous tradition, but also in the East, we know that one of the problems that has the yoga and the Eastern spirituality in the West is that there was a lack of respect on how we translate it. We translate it just in a conceptual way, in a literal way, not knowing that there's a different way of cognition. There's a different way of seeing the world, both in the East and both in the indigenous tradition. So when we translate these terms, we cannot go and look for just one word that can express that term, because the cognition has to do with this inclusivity. So it's not about like, this is red and this is blue. No. The colors are actually part of what we are. So there's no this separation. Everything is way more bigger. It is definitely a broader way of seeing the world, because it's more truly integrated. So Aini, it's kind of something that has to do with caring. It's a principle of caring. Again, the straightforward way of translating usually is reciprocity, but reciprocity has a lot of aspects. One is, you cannot have reciprocity if you are not caring for the other one. So there's compassion there. There's awareness there. There is already kind of like the seed of consciousness development. And then also it's to come closer into things, to exchange also, but it's not an exchange based on an interest. It's an exchange just, again, of reciprocity, of cooperation. So that's why, for example, in the indigenous tradition, there is what is called the payments, that is just giving back to Earth all that we receive from her. We cannot pretend that, we are here, the top of the notch humanity. We are so intelligent, and all this world was just created by the Creator, so that we can do whatever we want with this world. No, no, it's a living organism, and not just a living organism. It has a spirit. It has soul. This is another thing so beautiful about the Aini, and what he was talking about, this inclusivity, is like the relationship is with everything around you. There's relationship with the tree, there's relationship with the animals, and there is an open and deep relationship, to the point that they know what the tree is saying. They know what an animal is saying. He was specifically talking about the example that when you come across an eagle, the eagle, any animal that come across you, is not random, and any animal, because it has an identity and it has same like us, a particle of that divinity, is playing a role of interaction. So if we just see them as something lower, we miss all that. And he was saying that's why problems that we might talk about these later on, like addiction, is a disease of the spirit, is a disease of the soul. It's not a mental disease. And the reason for this disease actually has been created by the Western materialistic world. Just thinking about materialism and what you get and what you have and what you achieve, right? And then what happened? Also, you go into your spirituality, and then you start to practice that spirituality with that kind of mental setup. What is what I'm going to get? I'm going to get samadhi. I'm going to be able to just become a yoga teacher, and a very advanced yoga teacher. And then somehow I was no one, and now I have 40 people listening to me. I have people, and then somehow I end up being someone, right? So he said, like, that kind of spirituality that is kind of like not into this principle of inclusivity, but in the principle of actually of mixing without respect for what you are first, and then so you can have respect for what the other vision is bringing to you. Because the truth is, like, we Westerners, we are raised in a very different tradition. And then when we try to reach out to the East, if we don't reach out to the reach from our own root, we get lost. And this is something that often happens in the spiritual world of nowadays. We end up changing our names. We're changing radically our way of living. We are, without even notice, we end up imposing rules on the things that we've been developing for so many years. And this is lack of respect to us, and lack of respect also to our ancestors. And then if we don't have roots, how come you're going to be able to integrate something new into your life? So that's what happened here with Indigenous. They have very, very, very strong roots. So when the Europeans came, that's why there was kind of like this deep conflict. Of course, they were more developed in terms of armies and guns, and then they were able to subdue the people, to impose over the people, but they were never able to actually own their souls and their spirit. Apparently they were able to slave their physical bodies, but never their spirits. So going back to this principle of Aini, is the principle of inclusivity, is the principle of adding up to what you are, instead of getting lost by saying, like, oh no, I don't want to be this, I don't want to be Westerner, now I want to be Eastern, and I want to just become another religion because this religion is going to give me that. Of course, it's not out of judging. This can happen, but in order for that to happen in a way that can serve the process of the spirituality, which is to find oneself back, to find out what we really are, and to find the essence of what we are. And when we find the essence of what we are, then is when we reach the purpose of the spirituality, to have a realization of where we came from, and to have an actual supreme self-realization, to have a relationship with divinity, and to get to know that, and then to be able to develop an abundant life. And then when there's this principle of inclusivity, something that he was saying in a very beautiful day, is that also, because they don't denied the physical world, when you develop your spirituality, this also has to be expressed in the transformation of your life. It's hard to, for them, for the indigenous tradition, he was saying, it's hard to understand how come a person that has been putting so much effort on developing its spirituality end up lacking physical resources. He was saying that there's this pilgrimage that they do to very specific mountains, and this pilgrimage has to do with one of the it's a lord. He mentioned it as a lord. I'll get the name later, but it's kind of like it's a specific pilgrimage to a specific place that has kind of like this frequency and this quality of abundance. And he was sharing how he has known many people that has done that pilgrimage that was like in poverty, and how it's amazing to see how as they develop this spirituality through this pilgrimage, they also are able to develop wealthiness.
Yeah, wealth.
Go ahead.
Wealth.
Wealth. Thank
Yeah.
you. Wealth. Wealth. So, it's something important because we cannot deny it. We all need, to have, we all want to have a comfortable living, right? So, if not wealth, at least just to have dignity. That was the word the word that he used, dignity. So as you develop with this principle of inclusion, your spirituality, that also will reflect into how you develop also abundance and wealth in your physical life. And then in this same process of reciprocity, and then in this process of inclusion, also the reason why we end up into a life of void, why we cannot reach fulfillment. This actually is what he was sharing, that this was actually the cause of the addiction. And then again, he said, addiction is a disease that was created because of this way of living that doesn't give the chance to the people to connect to themselves. So then, because they cannot find what we all need to find, that is our own self, and the beautiful expression of divinity all around us. And then we start just following ideologies, or whether materialistic ideologies, whether the ideologies that if you get to have all the properties and possessions that you have, you'll be happy, or whether religious ideologies that just work really hard on this world so that next life you'll have a piece of heaven, right? He was saying that is the reason why we have addictions, because we cannot fulfill ourselves, and then we keep looking for sources of fulfillment in places that are not real, that are real illusion, right? Because we all know that we can be, rich, but at the end, it's just create this anxiety and this narcissism that also happens in the spirituality, and then we just keep trying to get more samadhi, or more money, or more possessions, and it leads to nowhere. Instead, when you walk this living spirituality, that is by walking earth, and you have this inclusivity, you have fulfillment in any aspect of your life. Why? Because you learned also the language of this united spirituality. So the eagle goes across you and it brings you a message. And come on, who would not be like totally happy to receive a message from an eagle, or from a fox, or from a tree? So they walk in a world that is constantly fulfilling their joy, because it's based on their nature, on the beautiful thing of being human, as instead of the prison of the body, or is of the burden of being human and having to face all this world of pain and suffering. So that if we do it right in a very rigid way, maybe we get a little bit of bliss when we reach to perhaps own a piece of heaven. So It's so beautiful to and so powerful, you know. And then you see why these people live at happiness, and then you understand why the indigenous world had so much strength to go over all those years of suffering, of seeing people taking and stealing their land, and not just stealing their land, but raping their mother, because that's what nature it is. And out of the blue, just taking them out of what they belong to. And how come many of them were able to succeed? Actually, you know, nowadays they are still there, still here. Why? Because they can take everything out of you, but they cannot take your spirit. And when your spirit is united to any other creature in the world, you are never alone. And this is another beautiful thing that he expresses about the spirituality in the East. You know, how risky it is to perform, to go over a spiritual process alone. And this is, of course, something about the yogic tradition. We went into a cave, we tried to develop our self-realization into a cave in isolation. So yeah, good luck. You get your enlightenment, you get your piece of heaven here now on earth, which is great, and is a total, is a real value of what Eastern spirituality has to offer to us. But then you come out of the cave, and what you're going to do? If the only thing that you know is to walk alone, the only enlightenment that you know is the enlightenment that you get when you're alone, in your solitude, and you're in your silence. So I think, of course, there is a value in that, because they give us the chance to have a little piece of that heaven, not waiting until we die, right? But on the other hand, it's extremely, I have to say, useless, or it's very, very difficult, very challenging to be able, and we all know, we all yoga practitioners know how that's the difficult part of the yoga practice. You go into your retreat, you go into your mat, you go into your meditation. It's so wonderful to perceive that thing that you are doing nothing, and you don't need anything to perceive that bliss. But then you go out there and it ends. It's over, right? But instead, what's that?
In a nanosecond, it's over.
Exactly.
As soon as you get off the plane.
But then, of course, if this spirituality is bound to any other creature, then you don't have to relate kind of like in your own self, you know, in order to keep that state of bliss. It's constantly the whole environment and the whole nature, and any creature is a potential source to provide you with this joy. So we don't have to walk alone. And that's what he was saying. It's so risky that way. And not just that is risky because, of course, it's they're pretty much useless in the interaction with the other and in the interaction with such a different world. And again, look at the world that the indigenous people are living at, you know, to see so many unconscious people destroying nature and thinking and claiming that they own that land because they brought their armies to kill them and to take possession over those over those lands, when they don't even care about the possession. They don't even care about the power. What they care is about the destruction that they are bringing into their world, because it's also their world. I mean, the Westerners and the indigenous is the same world. We all live in the same world. But some kind are destroying the world that everyone's belongs to. So of course it's very tough, and still they are there, still here. Why? Again, because this inclusivity that because of that principle, you don't have to go into a non-judgmental mind. Your life is a non-judgmental life, because it's not searching for what is wrong, who's the enemy. Is just searching for what I can get from the other perspectives. And he shared that even in the indigenous world, when there was conflict between two different cultures, there was not this way of submission, of going and taking the others. No, it was actually the prize was actually to be able to include what the others brought. And he said that actually because of this Aini principle, there was never, or in this, at least in this perspective on the indigenous, because of course we cannot put it into a general, there was like thousands, hundreds of thousands, and I am not exaggerating, hundreds of thousands of different ethnical groups and cultures in the Americas. But he was saying that in this perspective, and because of this principle, there were no conflict armies. What they do is the curaca, what they call is the leader. The leader will go and have a confrontation with the other one, and then that's courage. Okay, you have a problem with my people. I am the leader. Okay, you, the leaders, they go, they fight each other, and then whoever defeat then has not the rule over the other ones, but then the right to be included on the one who was defeated, right? Oh, how wonderful would be, and he said this, how wonderful would be that all these politicians and powerful people from the world, if they have a problem, why don't you go and solve it? Okay, you're our leader, you're at our service, go and face the other one on our behalf, instead of sending the children of others to a slaughter war. That's not courage. That's a very coward ideology. Based on what? On narcissism. Based on like, I'm at the top of the world, so you go and I send your kids to be killed and to kill other kids so that we can sustain our power. So I'm running out of time. I don't know how. I'm hoping that I've been covering few of these things. But now I just want to go very, before I run out of time, into the medicinal protocol. The medicinal protocol, of course, they have an amazing knowledge of the plant kingdom. And as we know, any pharmaceutical drug comes from the plant. Okay, nowadays it could come actually from a living being, from a DNA of someone else. But mainly, most of the plants comes from most of the medicines come from the plant. So they had this amazing knowledge. They said that, when the Europeans came here, they didn't have antibiotics, the Europeans. But instead, the indigenous, they already had, antibiotics with plant-based antibiotics, and they had an amazing knowledge. And of course, nowadays, this knowledge is still there. Sadly, it's been kind of like due to confusion and ignorance. Now it's becoming something trendy, the shamanism, going and taking ayahuasca. And ayahuasca is just one of the thousands of plants that they have that they don't consider sacred. To them is just a relationship of brother and sisterhood. And of course, this is kind of like elder sisters in this case, but it's not something that is sacred as kind of like a god, how we tend to think, or how the anthropologists often think that it is like that for the indigenous traditions. But apart from that, they also developed an amazing protocol, because they develop a medicine that treats the soul, which is actually the only medicine that can help people with addiction and people with many other facing many other sufferings that are not sufferings of the mind, it's not suffering of the psychology, it's sufferings of the soul. And actually, the root means to study the soul, not to study the mind. I don't know at what point ended up becoming just studying the mind, perhaps because the leader of psychology was a cocaine addict at the beginning. Thanks God that now we've been developing and perhaps psychology has been entering into this somehow inclusive perspective. And nowadays, of course, we cannot put into a general terms. But nevertheless, the point here is that they develop a medicinal protocol based on the treatment of the spirit, of the soul, of the diseases of the soul. And then that's why they are so effective. And the other thing is, again, because this principle of inclusivity, they don't neglect or deny other things. If a pharmaceutical, chemical drug and medicine is doing a benefit, they will integrate it as part of their medicinal protocol, instead of like, no, 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 you have to go the indigenous way. No, 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 there's no indigenous way. I mean, the indigenous way is to be smart enough to include everything that can bring good to oneself, whether it's the patient or whether it's someone else or whether it's the world. And then the other aspect of the indigenous protocol is that it considers the patient. The patient is actually the one who leads the healing process, and the doctor is the one who is just assisting that process. And then the plants, of course, are the one that are enabling this process. So, of course, using these plants in a wrong way, where it doesn't consider the patient, where the doctor or the shaman or however they want to call it is not actually serving the process, it might actually bring more harm than bringing more benefit. This is something to be very, very careful about. So pretty much that's the protocol. And then imagine having the chance to talk to someone that is not giving to you your his perspective in this case, but is that just someone that can assist you to find the answers within you, and him being assisted by plants, by animals, by the wisdom of an eagle, by the wisdom. It might sound crazy, but it is like that. They have the language that permits this exchange of wisdom with all creatures. So when you have this kind of like interaction with someone like Pio, this is what you get. It's not just the wisdom of this guy that is true and sincere, but it's that, of course, through him, you get also the wisdom of all the creatures around you and the nature around you, and all for the sake so that you yourself, the person that is asking and seeking for that help, for that advice, has the opportunity to develop the clarity that is looking for, and out of that clarity, through the connection with the self, through the connection with the spirit, being able to solve the trouble that he's facing, the crisis that he's facing, or whatever. So that is what the invitation here. Chari is putting there on the comments the email. You go there, you write to them. The lady that is helping Pio to schedule, her name is Karina, because write in English. We also, Pio has also access to translators in English, in German, and in French. So this pretty much covers the whole world. You can schedule there. You can actually, I don't want to say actually the price, because I'm just really pushing Pio to just like, put it a little bit more, a bigger income, especially because, I think it's way too low compared to what we actually pay to a psychotherapist, or like, and not, of course, not to say that this is less, but just to say like, this is truly a professional support, and a guy that is really in a very sincere way there to serve you, and not to impose any knowledge on you, thanks to this Aini principle of reciprocity. So if we enter into a medicinal protocol, we must make sure that we are entering into a process of reciprocity. Otherwise, we don't know where that protocol is going to take us to, where that protocol is going to lead us to. And then the other project is the Reforestation project. All I can tell you is that I sleep at peace at night, because I know that somehow, even with this donation, I planted a tree. I cooperate, I collaborate to plant a tree daily, day by day. And even if you have kids or not, we have to. This is another principle of this spirituality, this traditional spiritual tradition, living tradition, is that we have to make sure that we're thinking about what we're going to leave behind when we leave this body. And what we have to leave behind is the beautiful world that we received and that we've been able to grow at, making sure that others can enjoy that, and not just thinking about how we can just take out their resources so that we can increase our power, our ego. But what is what we're going to leave behind? And, you know, we can be vegetarians. That could be good, but don't take it. Don't stay just on being vegetarian, because perhaps this is like in the yoga, it's the yama, right? What you do in order to prevent, to create more harm. That's good. Okay, that's good. But what are we doing to restore? In that case, vegetarianism is not enough. You know, there are so many trees that are burned right now in the Amazon jungle. And what are we doing to restore all that? So we have to move one step ahead. We have to move into the world of action. And this is the gift of this indigenous ancient tradition that it brings. It's just eager to share with the humanity this way of seeing the world with inclusivity. Let's add up the goodness of the world. And let's make sure that we move into the world of action, that we're not just developing a spirituality of contemplation, but what our spirituality is waking us up and making us stand up and do something, not just to prevent from destruction, but actually to restore creation, and in this case, of course, divine creation. Thank you.
Thanks, Andre. Just one note on Pio is that he's a classically educated Youngin psychiatrist. I mean, the man
Psychotherapist.
Yeah. So what he sees, you know, what he gives, the gift that he has is to allow you to realize what everything that you're projecting out is within you. And really, you end up seeing your own way to healing. So it's not like, I think maybe some traditional talk therapies where it's out, it just stays out, or it stays in the mind. It's actually integrated into your whole life and your whole being, so that you can become whole again. So I think that, you know, if we're so much into, you know, leaving the body, transcending. And really this is about coming back and reconnecting to who we are. So.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that and put it into such a bright way, Chari. Final invitation, the live Instagram that I did with Pio last night is there, still on my Instagram, and it will remain there. So even if you don't speak Spanish now, and if this is the first time that you are listening about Pio, knowing about Pio through this little time with me, then I invite you to go there. And even if you don't speak Spanish, just to perceive a little bit, to see him a little bit, because it's important to have discrimination, discernment, and to check it out in the spiritual world. So you make sure that you are with someone that is serving you and not someone that is trying to take advantage of you. So I invite you to check on him, to see him, even if you don't speak Spanish, you'll be able to perceive his energy. Chari's again put in there in the comments, sachaqente. Actually, Chari is SACHAQENTE.
Okay.
So remove the U, please. Okay, and then also the PayPal link, so that you can do your donations, and that you make sure that's it. That's the PayPal, Sachaqente Peru, and then same Sachaqente Gmail, without the Peru Gmail at gmail.com. And then, of course, the other invitation is take advantage in the middle of quarantine, bringing beautiful gifts. One of them is to have a personal private consultation with Maestro Pio. And the other one is just so that we can create this idea of reciprocity, to come together and to do something to save our planet, to plant more trees, and to restore the beautiful divine kingdom that the Creator has given to us, and that we have to protect and we have to restore. Thank you all for your listening and your desire to move into the world of action. Thank you very much, Chari.
You're welcome.
For being by my side always.
Of course.
All the best. Take care, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Plant more trees.